The film starts in the bedroom of a woman who has recently overdosed. Her young daughter, Rose, enters her room and witnesses her mother's body laid among the mess. In the present day, the daughter, Rose Cotter, is a therapist, going about her day at work. She deals with a manic patient named Carl. He continuously mutters about people dying and that he is going to die. Rose attempts to comfort him, but Carl continues with his episode. Rose is so passionate about helping her patients that she hasn't gone home since her late shift last night. But just as she's about to go home, she receives a phone call informing her of the arrival of a new patient, Laura Weaver, who needs immediate assistance. When Rose meets her, Laura is distressed after a recent incident where she witnessed her professor bludgeon himself to death. Since then, Laura claims to have been seeing an evil presence that takes the form of others. Laura insists that she's not crazy, but she is being followed by an entity that no one else can see. The figure is able to disguise itself as anyone, sometimes taking the form of someone she knows, and other times a stranger. What distinguishes the figure from normal people is that it would smile widely at her, but not a friendly smile. To make it even worse, the figure told her that she's going to die today. After turning away from Rose and looking back, Laura begins panicking and freaking out. Rose calls for help, but she looks back to find that Laura has picked up a broken shard from a vase and is now flashing an unsettling grin. Laura slashes her throat before help arrives, leaving Rose in shock. Rose speaks to two detectives, one of whom is her ex, Joel, for details on the event. She explains what she saw and also talks to her boss, Dr. Morgan Desai. Later, Rose goes to her home that she shares with her fiancé Trevor and their cat Moustache. She downs some wine in an attempt to calm herself down, right when she suddenly notices a creepy sight of Laura standing in the corner of the room, smiling at her. She then gets interrupted by her fiancé, Trevor, who just came home from work. After she told him what happened at work, she watches how Laura is no longer standing at the corner, so she brushes it off as her hallucination. Rose and Trevor go to dinner with Rose's sister Holly and her husband Greg, but Rose is so traumatized from Laura's suicide that she snaps at Holly when she chastises Rose about forgetting Holly's son Jackson's upcoming birthday. Rose attempts to go back to work and move on. Out of curiosity, she heads to the front desk and asks for the case report of the professor who killed himself in front of Laura. This is when her ex-boyfriend Joel suddenly pops in, having come to check on how she's doing after what happened yesterday. After insisting she's fine and telling him to leave, she retreats to her office to study the case report about the professor, whose name was Gabriel Munoz. She receives a call from Holly as they both apologize for the argument, and Holly asks Rose to at least get Jackson a birthday gift. While they talk, Rose looks out the window and appears to see what looks like Laura in the distance. When Rose walks by Carl's room, he is seen with a disturbing smile, like Laura, and begins to repeatedly tell Rose, "You're going to die." She calls for help, and Carl gets restrained, but it turns out Carl was apparently lying on his bed the entire time. This causes her boss to summon her to ask what's up, because Carl has been a patient for a long time and yet never exhibited violent behavior. He assumes that Rose must have misinterpreted Carl's gesture because she's traumatized by the suicide yesterday. Therefore, he decides to give her a week off to recuperate. When Rose goes to buy a gift for Jackson, she sees an apparition of Laura again, still grinning. Later that night, Rose is still home alone when the house alarm starts blaring. Scared, she arms herself with a pair of scissors and heads for the front door, only to find it still locked. However, her back door is open. She then gets a phone call from a home security operator checking if she's okay. But weirdly, the caller then tells her to look behind her, which confuses Rose. What makes it even weirder, the phone rings again, and Rose realizes that she's not holding a phone this entire time. Once again, she reaches to pick up the call, and luckily, this time, it's from an actual operator. A couple of officers are dispatched to check the premises, but they find nothing out of the ordinary. Her fiancé Trevor arrives just as the officers leave, worrying if she's okay, but she yet again assures him she's fine. To add to Rose's anxiety that night, she can't seem to find her cat, Moustache. Later that night, Rose has trouble sleeping and resorts to listening to the recording of the session she had with Laura. Right after Laura starts screaming, Rose hears a faint whisper in the recording. But when she raises the volume and listens to it again, she hears her name in it. Seeing the figure shocks Rose, so she arms herself with a knife, but the figure has disappeared. Trevor comes to her aid and is freaked out by her current state. This is when Rose begins to question her sanity, so she goes to see her therapist, Madeline. The therapist assesses that Rose isn't delusional, but simply reliving her unhealed childhood trauma from witnessing her mother die of overdose. With that, Rose tries to move on. Over the weekend, Rose goes to Jackson's birthday party. When it is time to give out gifts, he takes Rose's, which is supposed to be a toy train. Instead, Jackson opens the box and finds Mustache's corpse. Everyone freaks out, and Rose tries to assure everyone that she did not do this, but she sees one of the other moms appear to have the entity's evil grin. Rose stumbles backwards and falls through a glass table, severely injuring her arms. Rose is brought to the hospital for medical attention. Morgan visits her after becoming aware of her episode and suggests she take time off work. When Trevor brings her home, Rose tries to explain herself, but he thinks she is losing her mind and that she really did kill Mustache. Trevor doesn't believe her and starts saying that perhaps Rose is mentally ill, just like her mom was. Rose begins to do some investigating. She plays audio recorded from her session with Laura and hears what sounds like a faint breathing noise. She also looks up Laura's professor, Gabriel Munoz, and tracks down his widow, Victoria. She tells Rose that Gabriel had claimed to have seen visions of something haunting him just days after he witnessed another woman named Anna Powell commit suicide. When Rose claims that she is experiencing what Gabriel did, Victoria thinks that Rose is mocking her tragedy and she orders her to leave. Rose visits Joel for help in her investigation, despite his initial reluctance. He looks up Anna Powell and finds that she died by gouging her eyes out. It is also reported that Anna saw a man commit suicide too, which is shown in security footage from a gas station where the man is seen with the creepy smile before he impaled himself in front of Anna. Rose goes on to print all this evidence and is about to present it to her fiancé. However, when Rose returns home, she finds that Trevor has called Madeline to provide a house call session since they are concerned for Rose's mental state. Rose snaps at Trevor, saying that he is more concerned with how she is going to make him look, leading to her storming out and breaking up with him. Rose also goes to visit Holly in an attempt to explain herself about the birthday, but Holly will not forgive Rose and says that she is spiraling like their mother did. Rose fires back that Holly never attempted to be there for their mother and that she had to take care of her until the end. Rose goes back to the car and appears to see Holly walk back to her, but it is just the entity haunting her. Later that night, Rose receives a call from her ex Joel, informing her that he has discovered a pattern of 20 different suicide witnesses and 19 suicides with a direct line linking them all together. Apparently, somewhere along the line, one man named Robert Talley witnessed a suicide, and then he went out to kill someone else, and Robert is still alive today. Fascinatingly, the key eyewitness to this murder committed suicide a week later, and the cycle continued. And so, Joel agrees to drive Rose to see Robert Talley in prison, and on the way, she told him everything that's been happening. Unlike everyone else, Joel believes her. He also tells her that none of these victims lasted more than a week, which increases Rose's fear as today is her 4th day. Robert Talley tells Rose that the entity latches itself onto people's trauma and spreads itself to new victims. Each of the victims witnessed a suicide, and they became the next victims, so Robert killed someone to prevent the entity from killing him. When Rose tells him that she cannot kill anyone, Robert freaks out and thinks that Rose brought the entity with him, forcing him to be restrained. Rose goes back home and tries talking to Madeline, seeing her at home on her own accord. This turns out to be the entity in disguise, since Madeline calls her for real moments later. The entity, as Madeline, grins at her and says, "Rose's time is coming." Fearing she has no choice, Rose drives to her job with a knife. She goes into the building and finds Carl's room, where she goads him into freaking out. Morgan runs in and sees Rose stabbing Carl repeatedly. He screams and appears to tear his face off, but this is just a nightmare that Rose had after she passed out in her car. She drives away when Morgan sees her, along with the knife in her car. Rose calls Joel and tells him that she has to isolate herself in order to stop the entity from spreading to anybody else. She drives up to her childhood home where her mother died. When it is dark, the entity appears to Rose as a tall, long-haired, monstrous version of her mother that is always smiling. Rose expresses her anger toward her mother for how she behaved due to her illness, and how she never got the help she needed. The entity follows and taunts Rose until she sets it on fire and runs out of the house as it burns. She then goes to Joel's apartment and claims that she finally got rid of it. Then Joel tells her that she can never get rid of it, and he flashes a creepy smile. Once again, Rose was dreaming. She is still back at the house. The entity finds her and tears its face off before stretching Rose's jaw open and climbing into her mouth. Joel shows up and enters the house, only to find Rose dousing herself with kerosene. She turns around, flashing her own creepy smile, and she lights herself on fire in front of a horrified Joel. The movie ends as Joel helplessly watches Rose burn.